I am the Swarm. Author, Quantum Wizard. Chapter 261, The Search. General Masai had been troubled for the past few days. The rescue operations for the missing patrol teams across various bases had been remarkably successful. A total of over 1,000 missing personnel were retrieved from 11 battle zones, delivering a significant blow to the Swarm. But none of this brought him any joy. One of the Riken bases had been overrun by the Swarm. Though the support troops quickly reclaimed the base, the issue was that its commander had gone missing. Worse still, the missing person was a young captain with significant backing. If this person were to die here, it would spell considerable trouble even for someone of his rank and influence. Your Excellency, Major General Porter is calling. Just as General Masai was massaging his temples, trying to sort things out, the mechanical voice of the ship's AI rang out. The message only worsened his headache, causing him to rub his temples even harder. Don't answer. Tell him I'm resting. Understood. Reply sent. Your Excellency, I must remind you that you have been resting for 32 hours. However, based on the readings, your body hasn't shown signs of recovery. It seems your rest quality has been poor. Would you like me to schedule a doctor's appointment? Shut up. Understood. Beginning shutdown protocol. Half an hour later, a meeting was convened. Still no progress. General Masai got straight to the point. Several officers in charge of the matter shook their heads. The gunboat crash site is far from the base. We didn't have any surveillance in that area at the time. When we reviewed satellite footage, the images were unclear due to nighttime conditions. General Masai was getting increasingly frustrated. These people were usually so capable, yet they were dropping the ball at this critical moment. Then, are they still alive? The officers exchanged glances before one of them hesitantly spoke. Based on the gunboat's flight data, its altitude at the time of the crash, the impact force, and the angle of descent, the likelihood is high that the crew survived. Seeing the general's displeased expression, another officer quickly added, the gunboat hadn't completely lost power upon crashing. Thanks to the pilot's competent response, the impact wasn't severe. Most of the crew likely only experienced brief unconsciousness without sustaining fatal injuries. I'm asking if they're still alive now, not whether they were alive then. General Masai finally lost his temper, unleashing a torrent of curses. The frustrations of the past few days poured out in that moment. Damn, that felt good. After venting, he felt a bit more relaxed. General Masai understood that they didn't have any more information. If Porter, who had dispatched a large search team to the area, was still pestering him, it meant they hadn't found the missing crew. Looking at his subordinates, who remained silent with their heads bowed, General Masai sighed and changed the topic. What about the investigation into how the base was breached? Are the results out yet? Compared to the fate of Lieutenant Colonel Cross, he was more concerned about how the Swarm managed to overrun an entire base in just 20 minutes, forcing its commander to flee. That investigation has yielded results. By analyzing all the surveillance records from inside and outside the base, and combining them with survivor accounts, we've roughly reconstructed the events. The officers exchanged glances before selecting a representative to step forward and report. Delivering such news while the general was in a bad mood was no enviable task. The Swarm first climbed to the top of a giant tree 5 kilometers from the base and glided down to evade most of the outer defenses. Their gliding range far exceeded our expectations. In the footage we retrieved, we observed some attackers flapping their extended limbs like wings to gain lift. This might explain how they managed to glide 5 kilometers. General Masai frowned. I don't care about that. What I care about is how they knew how to avoid our external defenses. The reporting officer glanced at the general nervously and replied in a low voice, the exact reason is still unclear. Noticing the general's rising anger, he quickly added, however, we did find some new, small swarm organisms within the base. Dr. Balt's dissections revealed that they possess the ability to emit and receive ultrasonic waves. He suspects these organisms are reconnaissance units. They likely used these capabilities to identify the base's defenses and later to track Lieutenant Colonel Cross's location during the attack. Why would they target Cross? Were they trying to abduct her? General Masai asked. We consulted several experts on this matter. Judging by how they killed every base member they encountered and didn't take anyone alive, it's unlikely to have been a kidnapping. It was more like an act of revenge. They attacked the most populated area of the base. Since most personnel were gathered in the command room, the Swarm concentrated their assault there. When Lieutenant Colonel Cross and her team attempted to evacuate, the swarm tracked and adjusted their attack routes accordingly. Moreover, the swarm has never shown intelligence sufficient for communication. Without that capability, Lieutenant Colonel Cross's identity would be meaningless to them. From this, it seems the incident was purely coincidental. Coincidental? If it was a coincidence, it was too much of one. General Masai found it hard to believe in such extraordinary luck. But if it wasn't a coincidence, what was the swarm's objective? He couldn't figure it out. Every action must have a purpose. Kidnappers, for example, take hostages either for safety or for ransom. But if the swarm had abducted Cross, they hadn't made any demands. This didn't seem like a kidnapping. Could it truly have been a coincidence? Half an hour later, a captain's meeting commenced. General Masai shared all the information he had gathered with the other captains and said, even if this appears coincidental, we must remain vigilant. Ensure that no trees taller than 100 meters exist within 10 kilometers of any base. Also, strengthen base defenses. Add external monitoring devices and outposts. I don't want any more surveillance blind spots. But this will require at least 10 times more monitoring equipment and several times more personnel, one captain pointed out. The equipment isn't an issue. We brought plenty and can replenish it once the ground factories are operational. As for personnel, figure it out yourselves. Why are so many people staying aboard the ships? Send them to the ground bases. T-853 hadn't been fully pacified yet, and every faction's captains were hoping to let others take the risks on the surface while keeping their own forces intact. This way, they could maintain an advantage when it came time to divvy up the spoils. However, the ground forces deployed so far had mostly been under General Masai's command, aside from a few contributions from factions holding key base positions. This had clearly irked the fleet's overall commander. Continuing the status quo was no longer an option. After issuing his orders, General Masai noticed Major General Porter's face on the screen. The man's resentful gaze bore into him. Remembering his own rest of over 30 hours, General Masai's earlier assertiveness waned. Clearing his throat, he softened his tone, "Porter, don't worry too much. According to the experts, although we've deeply angered the swarm near Cross's base, the swarm near her crash site likely belongs to a different group. There's a good chance Cross is still alive." Chapter 262, The Truth? Humph, I already know that, Major General Porter snapped, his tone sharp as he finally addressed General Masai, who had been resting for so long. But the longer this drags on, the slimmer Cross's chances of survival become. If she dies, none of us will have an easy time explaining it. Although General Masai outranked Major General Porter by a level, Porter was a general with real authority. If he decided to make an issue out of it, Masai would still have to give him some face. So, what do you suggest? We've already deployed nearly 100,000 personnel to search the area. Yet this nest is bizarre, we haven't even found their food storage to this day. The rescue efforts for other bases had been proceeding smoothly. Not only were numerous personnel saved, but the operations were also carried out with minimal losses. The various units dispersed across the bases didn't rest after completing their missions. Given the retaliatory tendencies of the swarm, evidenced by the cross-base incident, it was clear that digging up so many granaries would likely provoke more retaliation. Thus, some forces returned to guard their respective bases, while the rest converged to conduct a grid search of the area where Cross had disappeared. Over the past 2 days, the forces had advanced over 1,000 meters through underground tunnels and excavated pits over 100 meters deep, all in search of hidden passageways. Yet oddly enough, they still hadn't found this swarm nest's granary. Of course, they couldn't find it, this nest's food storage hadn't even been built yet. The overwhelming response of the Riken forces had greatly startled the swarm. For the Riken to mobilize such massive resources over a missing base commander, this young Riken female must be far more important than the swarm initially thought. Fortunately, Cross's conversion site was deeply hidden underground, and the Riken forces wouldn't find it anytime soon. However, how to endure the 7-day conversion period became a pressing challenge. In just 2 days, the Riken forces had created such a stir. Under normal circumstances, they should have discovered the granary by now. Left with no other options, the swarm decided to stall for time. Any anomalies would have to be explained away by the Riken experts' reasonable deductions. At a meeting, biologist Dr. Bald presented findings and provided some constructive suggestions based on their ongoing research. Beyond classifying the acid-spitting and reconnaissance swarm units as new combat types, he also shared some intriguing observations. Although we still haven't located the granary of Nest C13, the designation for the swarm nest where Cross went missing, our study of the food storage in the previous 12 nests has revealed some interesting patterns, Dr. Balt began, pausing slightly as the others watched him with curiosity. Smiling faintly, he continued, the swarm seemed to prefer storing small, fresh prey. In every granary we've examined, there were no corpses. All the creatures encased in cocoons were alive, albeit weakened, but in surprisingly healthy condition. From satellite footage, though not very clear, we've observed that the swarm's diet isn't limited to small prey. Larger creatures over 3 meters long are also on their menu. Why, then, do we never find large creatures stored in their granaries? Because transporting them is inconvenient. Among all the swarm units we've identified so far, regardless of their roles, none are particularly large. Transporting whole large creatures would be difficult for them. So when they capture large prey, they likely butcher it on site and then transport the pieces back to their nest. And how does that help our operations? One captain couldn't help but interject. Don't rush, let me finish, Dr. Balt replied. Because of the high temperatures on T853, these meat chunks are not easy to preserve. Thus, the swarm prioritize consuming them quickly. The smaller prey, however, is stored for times when hunting isn't as successful. When food supplies dwindle, they'll select smaller, dying creatures to consume. While we haven't yet found Lieutenant Colonel Cross's location, this insight could improve her chances of survival. We can airdrop large quantities of fresh food into the target area. The food must be perishable and preferably injured, such as wounded bull demons. With an ample food supply, the swarm won't need to kill the small prey in their granaries. The logic resonated with everyone. To increase Cross's survival odds, the Riken forces began capturing large creatures daily and, before the swarm's regular hunting times, deposited them near the nest. To ensure the swarm could easily capture them, the creatures were left gravely wounded. This behavior left Luowen and the other intelligent entities puzzled. What kind of narrative had the Riken experts concocted this time? After some analysis, they guessed the Riken reasoning. Luowen had been fretting over how to ensure Cross's survival without raising suspicion. Since the Riken forces had devised a justification themselves, the swarm decided to cooperate. Thus, during the day, the Riken forces continued their relentless digging and blasting, while at night, the swarm emerged to hunt and carried the butchered remains of the large prey back to their nest. With this unspoken coordination between both sides, 7 days passed swiftly. So that's how it is. After listening to Cross's account, Luowen fell into deep thought. The Riken had no real backing, their technological search had been triggered by reverse engineering an ancient spaceship of unknown origin. Cross had a unique background. She had a sister who was involved in reverse engineering the ancient vessel. While her sister hadn't divulged many details, even the scraps she knew exceeded the knowledge of most of the Riken expedition fleet's captains. According to Cross, the unearthed spaceship was a relic tens of thousands of years old. At that time, although life existed on Riken, civilization had yet to emerge. Why had this spaceship appeared on Riken's moon during such a time? Its purpose was unclear. The ship's technological level was incredibly advanced, and according to Cross, the Riken had barely scratched the surface in their reverse engineering efforts. Was this truly an accident? Considering how the swarm orchestrated what the Riken perceived as accidents, it was evident that surface appearances weren't everything. Although the swarm's methods were sometimes flawed, they revealed enough for discerning eyes to spot. Based on the technology described by Cross, a spaceship from such an advanced civilization would travel at incredible speeds. If it had indeed crashed by accident, the impact alone would have obliterated most of Riken's moon, triggering chain reactions capable of wiping out life on Riken. However, Riken's archaeological studies had found no evidence of such an event. Moreover, without external interference, natural evolution alone would likely be insufficient to produce a high-intelligence civilization within tens of thousands of years. This analysis suggested that the spaceship had deliberately landed on the moon. But why had it not landed directly on Riken? Was it due to the atmosphere? Chapter 263, Discovery. Perhaps there wasn't any conspiracy at all, it could simply be a gift from a higher civilization to a lower one. After discovering a planet capable of nurturing life, they left a spaceship on its moon. When the inhabitants of the planet evolved to develop civilization, and eventually reached space to explore their satellite, they would discover the ship. The technology on the spaceship would help this fledgling civilization advance into the cosmos at a much faster pace. Could such civilizations really exist in the universe? Perhaps. Luo Wen couldn't comprehend the ideology of higher civilizations that was something beyond his current understanding. Now, as one of the immortals, Luo Wen thought that perhaps tens of thousands of years later, when the swarm had grown to become a top-tier force in the universe, he might have the leisure to do something similar. Then, another thought struck him: tens of thousands of years ago, a higher civilization might have visited the Genesis planet. Although he had been in hibernation at the time, the planet had been nurturing life. Following this logic of gift-giving, could there be a gift on the red moon or yellow moon as well? Luo Wen quickly dismissed the idea. The twin moons had long been the swarm's initial footholds in space exploration and had been developed for many years. The fungal carpet now covered every inch of their surfaces. If there were any unknown objects, they would have been discovered long ago. Still, to be certain, Luo Wen directed the swarm to begin a search on the twin moons. Simultaneously, the swarm expanded its search to other terrestrial planets in the Genesis star system. These planets, being larger, had been somewhat neglected by the swarm during the later stages of development, as most resources had been allocated to space-based projects. It wasn't impossible that a higher civilization could have hidden a gift there. If one were to follow the gift hypothesis further, that might mean the higher civilization was monitoring everything. If so, wouldn't the swarm's activities over the years all have been under their watchful eyes? The information provided by Lieutenant Colonel Cross left Luo Wen's thoughts in a jumble. However, over the years, he had matured. Counting his hibernation period, Luo Wen's age might even surpass the history of that higher civilization. If he allowed himself to be scared by speculations of this sort, worrying about wolves in front and tigers behind, how could the swarm continue to develop? Dealing with enemies of similar strength required wit and courage. For those far superior, there was no other option but to feign ignorance and press forward. While Luo Wen expressed these lofty sentiments, he still made preparations for potential retreat. In the following days, the swarm used megastructures to launch a large number of swarm meteors randomly into the depths of space. One of these meteors secretly carried the excavated Genesis brood nest. Perhaps the higher civilization was conducting some sort of experiment in civilizational competition, but Luo Wen would not stop the swarm's development because of that. Only by becoming stronger could they break free of constraints and control their own destiny. The next stage of his plan was to acquire the ancient spaceship and related information unearthed by the Riken. As the first civilization to encounter the ancient vessel, the Riken must have obtained far more information, such as whether there were individuals from the higher civilization aboard, and if so, were they alive or dead. Any shred of information could help Luo Wen unravel the truth. As for conquering the Riken, Luo Wen already had a plan in mind. Still no news from Cross. Major General Porter asked via video, addressing the search teams. "Sir, we still have no updates regarding Lieutenant Colonel Cross," the officer on the other side of the call replied helplessly. This was the 12th time today the general had inquired, averaging once every half hour. Sigh. Porter ended the call with a heavy sigh. The personnel deployed for the search belonged to various factions, and the commander of Porter's contingent was Cleary. Cleary, however, held little hope for this operation. After all, Cross had been missing for 8 days. By now, she was probably nothing more than fertilizer. What a pity for such a stunning beauty. Even though their paths would rarely intersect, Cleary still found himself drawn to the thought of her. "Sir! We've found something!" A soldier suddenly came running from the entrance of a distant underground cavity. After a quick scan of the area, he locked onto the brooding Cleary and sprinted toward him. "What did you find?" Cleary asked reflexively, still caught in his thoughts. Then, as realization hit, his eyes widened. "Did you find Lieutenant Colonel Cross?" The soldier panted heavily, shaking his head. "No, sir." Cleary fell silent. Just moments ago, his heart had leapt with excitement. If they had found Cross, with her background, the title of her savior might have propelled him to great heights, perhaps even winning her hand in a romantic, albeit far-fetched, scenario. He had even started composing wedding vows in his mind, only for his hopes to be dashed. "So, what did you find?" "We've located those signals." Cleary, though lacking significant political clout, had climbed the ranks on merit and competence. He instantly understood what the soldier was referring to. The relationship between their search teams and the so-called swarm was peculiar. By day, they dug pits and unearthed soil, while the swarm seemed to sleep, showing no concern for the activities happening right outside their nests. At night, the teams hunted nearby and deposited their prey into the pits. By dawn, the swarm would send drones to retrieve the offerings and drag them back to their nest. And so, the cycle continued. Cleary suspected the swarm might even see them as caretakers. This caretaking, however, wasn't without its purpose. The teams had hidden trackers within some of the smaller prey, attempting to locate the swarm's feeding grounds. Although he believed the swarm incapable of understanding such advanced technology, unknown electromagnetic interference from the underground nest had prevented signal reception on the surface. Recently, the trackers had been upgraded to emit localized signals. Thus, during daylight hours, while excavation continued, teams were also dispatched into the caverns to search for these signals. The soldier's report likely referred to finding one such signal. Once his suspicions were confirmed, Cleary quickly relayed the information to Major General Porter, his heart racing with the possibility of glory, wealth, and promotion. Porter was overjoyed at the news. Although they hadn't found Cross directly, this was still better than having no leads. He immediately ordered Cleary to assemble a team to investigate further. At the same time, he reported the development to General Masai, requesting reinforcements. Chapter 264, Descent. Cleary had little desire to delve into the cavern. This nest was profoundly eerie and completely different from those they had encountered before. For other nests, their current relentless excavation efforts would have emptied them long ago. Yet this nest's sheer expanse and the labyrinthine complexity of its underground tunnels far exceeded all expectations. Dr. Balt, a biologist, speculated that this nest belonged to an unprecedentedly large swarm family, potentially housing an unimaginable number of organisms. This made any deep infiltration of the nest exceedingly dangerous. One needed to remember the nest near Cross Base, which, even after suffering a pitfall trap that killed hundreds of thousands of its swarm, losing its food stores, had still managed to deploy 200,000 troops to overrun the base. And this nest was even larger. That suggested the presence of millions, perhaps more, of the creatures inside. If they went berserk, even with advanced weaponry and seasoned troops, the invading forces would struggle to fend them off. Thankfully, this operation involved substantial manpower. With coordination from General Masai and Major General Porter, the first wave entering the underground nest exceeded 100,000 troops. The vast army divided into over 1,000 teams, each entering the nest through different passageways, converging toward the location emitting the signal. The paths within the cave were convoluted. The wider main corridors allowed 3 or 4 people to march side by side, while the narrowest passages barely permitted even the slimmest Reckon soldiers to crawl through after removing all their gear. Faced with such passages, the Reckon dared not proceed recklessly. To pass through, they would have to use tools to widen the tunnels. However, this approach was highly inefficient and risked causing cave-ins. For safety, the soldiers opted to take detours most of the time. Each time they encountered a fork in the path, their teams split further. Although they had entered with a large force, after several rounds of branching, most teams were reduced to just over 100 members. The swarm seemed indifferent to their intrusion. For an entire hour, not a single bug appeared. However, as they approached within 500 meters of the signal, the attacks began. These creatures clung to the cave walls in darkness, their concealment flawless. They emitted no heat signatures, making them nearly undetectable by conventional sensors. The Reckon's current early warning systems relied on vibration detection devices, capable of identifying enemies based on the sound of their movements. But if the bugs remained still, the devices were rendered useless. The Reckon's fleet research teams were urgently developing detection tools specifically for the swarm, but the civilization had only encountered the swarm a month ago. Such a short time frame was insufficient to yield meaningful results. A few Reckon soldiers, who had relaxed slightly due to the lack of prior attacks, were the first to fall victim. Their delayed reactions to the ambush cost them their lives. Raiders, often deployed for frontal assaults, were actually high agility, high-burst units with limited defenses, making them ideal for ambush and assassination tasks. Their pseudo-AI-like intelligence allowed them to remain perfectly still in a state of perpetual ambush, unaffected by hunger or distress unless ordered otherwise. The sound of chitinous blades piercing vital organs, dying gasps, panicked cries for help, and shocked screams merged into a cacophony of chaos. The swarm's efficient coordinated attacks, a mystery yet unsolved by the Reckon, unleashed a synchronized assault on all Reckon squads. In just 1 minute of combat, the Reckon forces suffered severe losses. 2 out of every 10 troops were killed, with some squads entirely wiped out. However, the slaughter ended there. The surviving Reckon soldiers quickly organized defenses. Their extensive combat experience against the swarm enabled them to mount a sharp counterattack. The swarm's rudimentary combat tactics and strategies often succeeded only once against the technologically advanced, systematically trained Reckon army. Ambushes like these wouldn't yield the same results again. In the narrow corridors, the swarm's physical bodies stood no chance against flamethrowers' lethal weapons in such confined spaces. Moreover, as an assassin-type unit, the raiders could only manage one strike before being overwhelmed. The swarm's offensive was swiftly repelled, leaving only charred corpses in the aftermath. Although the Reckon had suffered heavy casualties, the commanders felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Having conquered 11 nests, they knew exactly what this situation signified. They were close to the elusive food store. The swarm soon organized another wave of attacks, but against the now prepared Reckon forces, the results were dismal. The casualty ratios swung dramatically in the Reckon's favor. Gradually, the seemingly endless tide of swarm forces diminished. From an overwhelming flood, it became a trickle before finally ceasing altogether. The reinforcements had been entirely depleted. Over 1 million bugs had perished in the suicidal assault, by far the largest nest the Reckon had encountered. If the battle had taken place in open terrain, without the confined tunnels allowing complete firepower coverage, and if the swarm had been smarter in preserving their forces, the outcome could have been drastically different. It might have been the Reckon army that faced annihilation. But there were no ifs. The defeated paid with their lives, while the victors claimed everything. What the Reckon claimed was a massive food store composed of over 10 chambers. As usual, once the swarm's final suicidal wave was obliterated, the food store was empty of bugs. Only prey wrapped in white silk remained. Still, the Reckon cautiously gathered a large number of troops outside the food store before carefully entering, inspecting the surrounding walls and ceilings. Thankfully, the swarm had adhered to their patterns, and nothing unexpected occurred. Due to the immense size of the food store and the exhaustion of the Reckon troops after the battle, the search proceeded at an exceptionally slow pace. It wasn't until 5 hours later that a soldier, tearing open a silk cocoon, stumbled upon something that made his eyes light up as if he had seen a promotion and a raise materialize before him. Inside was a young female Reckon, strikingly beautiful. Her pale blue skin was even paler due to weakness. Her eyes were tightly shut, and she appeared lifeless, yet the faint movements of her nostrils and chest revealed she was still alive. Indeed, the swarm's food stores never contained dead prey, a fact gleaned from the Reckon's experience with 11 other nests. The soldier had never met Lieutenant Colonel Cross, but he had seen her photograph. While the woman before him looked slightly different from the picture, everyone understood how photos worked. Furthermore, given the mental and physical torment she must have endured, some changes in appearance were entirely reasonable. Chapter 265, Directed. This isn't Lieutenant Colonel Cross. Clary ran over at full speed upon receiving the report, but the sight of the female Reckon inside the silk cocoon quickly dampened his excitement. Unlike the ordinary soldiers who had only seen photos, Clary had met Cross in person multiple times as a confidant of Major General Porter. As such, he could immediately tell that the person before him was not Cross. Although this female Reckon wasn't Cross, Clary recognized her. It was her adjutant, either named Rita or Risha, if he remembered correctly. The adjutant had already regained consciousness and was visibly elated. Clary didn't question her condition, knowing from past experience that rescued Reckons usually required at least 2 days to recover their ability to speak. Asking now would be futile. While this wasn't exactly finding Cross, it was still a positive development. The adjutant's presence here meant they were on the right track. If Cross was still alive, she was likely somewhere nearby. Looking at the cocoon that was only a third of the way opened, hope was still strong. Clary ordered the troops to speed up. A promotion and a raise were within reach, and the previously sluggish team, now seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, accelerated their efforts. At the same time, Clary redistributed Cross's portrait to the team. Considering the circumstances, an entire gunship full of personnel, including dozens of young female medical staff, had gone missing. If every find stirred such dramatic highs and lows, it would take a toll on their morale. Good news often came suddenly. Within just half an hour, in the same chamber and not far from where the adjutant's cocoon had been found, a soldier had another breakthrough. This time, it wasn't a false alarm. It was genuinely Cross. Upon confirming her identity, Clary was overjoyed. He immediately halted further search operations and personally led a special operations team to escort Cross back to the surface. The team did not rest. Shortly after leaving the cave, a large transport craft dispatched by Major General Porter arrived to pick them up, flying them directly to a warship stationed in outer space. Due to Cross's prolonged disappearance and uncertain fate, her former base had not remained leaderless. Having suffered significant damage, the base urgently required someone to take charge and stabilize the situation. Under such circumstances, the base had naturally been reassigned, and not even Major General Porter could prevent it. Fortunately, the new commander was from their faction, so he had no reason to object. Now that Cross was alive, there was hope. Porter offered some comforting words to the still paralyzed and speechless Cross, expressing his hope that this experience would help her grow stronger as a leader. A few days later, after a preliminary recovery, Cross visited and thanked General Masai, Major General Porter, and other superiors. She then returned to her warship without showing much interest in the base's affairs. During a meeting of senior officers, they sighed privately. It seemed the ordeal had traumatized her. Whether she could overcome it would determine her future. If she could process it, she would grow stronger; if not, she might be finished. Several psychologists were dispatched to Cross's ship to aid in her recovery. The doctors advised that finding ways to vent her emotions and release her pent-up frustration would help significantly. The nest that had captured Cross was undoubtedly unique. After losing over 1 million bugs, it had retreated into hiding for a few days. However, the moment the Riken forces withdrew from the food store, it resumed its hunting activities that very night. Somehow, this news reached Cross. It was said that upon hearing it, the previously withdrawn Cross was so enraged that she vented her fury in a frenzy, smashing numerous items. "General, there's a nuclear reaction in Area 34. Wait, another one. 2 reactions with similar energy levels. Judging by the yield, they must be our tactical nukes." General Masai was sipping a hot drink. The past few days had been uneventful. As the Rikens gained more combat experience against the swarm, their troops had adapted quickly. Those damn bugs were no longer a significant threat. Base defenses had been strengthened across the board, with surveillance systems and sentries multiplied tenfold. Although the Rikens had taken the food stores of 12 nests, apart from Cross's former base, the retaliatory attacks on other bases had caused no major incidents. The swarm's raiding parties couldn't even approach the base perimeters before being detected and wiped out. General Masai had even begun to consider transforming T-853 into the Riken's second naturally habitable planet. Yet amidst these peaceful musings, the sudden report from his subordinate disrupted everything. What? 2 nuclear detonations? Who was stirring up trouble? Couldn't they let him have some peace? Ordinary Riken squads weren't equipped with tactical nukes. Only special operations teams carried 2 as standard. With both detonating simultaneously, the answer was clear. Check which special operations team is in the area. Every Riken soldier carried a personal terminal. Without magnetic interference on the surface, it was easy to locate their positions. A data report was projected onto the general's screen. The image displayed the face of Kaida. Kaida, a former patrol team leader and seasoned veteran, had been the first to sound the alarm during a swarm attack. He was also the first Riken rescued from the food store. While recuperating at Cross's base, Kaida had distinguished himself during a swarm assault. He had taken charge of injured personnel, organizing a stubborn defense. Although his actions in sending away Cross during the incident remained debatable, his courageous cover of his superior's retreat had earned widespread respect. When the rescue team finally arrived, Kaida's squad had held off the swarm for nearly 5 minutes, allowing for successful extraction. After Cross's rescue, rather than being punished, Kaida was promoted to captain of the TZ-131 team, directly under her command. "What a lucky guy," General Masai muttered, reviewing Kaida's record. Based on reports from Cross's ship, the general quickly pieced together what had happened. Area 34, adjacent to Cross's former base, was where the nest that had captured her was located. Those 2 nukes had to have been dropped on her orders for revenge. As the general considered how to handle the situation, Major General Porter's communication came through. As expected, the conversation confirmed Masai's suspicions. The nukes had indeed been launched at Cross's direction. Porter brushed it off as a young officer venting her frustrations, suggesting they let the matter slide as a favor to him. Chapter 266, Re-emergence. General Masai mulled it over. Although the unauthorized deployment of nuclear weapons could escalate into a serious issue, dealing with someone of Cross's background through official channels was nearly impossible. Better to sell Major General Porter a favor instead. It would strengthen ties between their factions and provide a potential avenue for cooperation during future resource distributions. After a round of enthusiastic, business-like flattery with Porter, Masai smoothly brushed the matter aside. Send a message to the other captains. Say it was a nuclear test to evaluate the damage yield against the nest. Masai fabricated a reason, preemptively addressing any suspicions. If he didn't explain, he'd soon be flooded with inquiries. Since the detonation site fell within Porter's factional territory, Masai trusted that Porter's people would corroborate the excuse. General, we're detecting a faint nuclear reaction in Area 39. It's moving rapidly, a crew member suddenly exclaimed from the monitoring station. Masai's face darkened. He set his drink down, exasperated. Someone was clearly stirring up trouble. Check who's over there, he ordered. The crew quickly accessed the data and reported, General, we don't have any operational units in that area. It's the shallow sea zone. The Recon had only been on Great Dawn Planet for about 2 months, including the time spent constructing bases, during which they had been preoccupied with fighting the swarm. No effort had been allocated to exploring the oceans yet. For a nuclear reaction to appear in the sea out of nowhere. Masai fell into deep thought. Then he remembered, apart from the swarm, they also had to watch out for alien creatures native to T-853. He had almost forgotten the original cause of their mission. Back then, the Ricans had come here after detecting a nuclear reaction. Further investigation, relayed by their cat's ear spaceship, revealed the source to be a colossal super beast. Now, the beast had reappeared, likely drawn by the 2 nuclear detonations. When the cat's ear first discovered it, it had also been triggered by a single nuclear detonation. However, Masai's expectations for this creature had dwindled since their initial encounter. While its bionuclear organs were fascinating, they weren't transformative for the mechanically inclined Rican civilization. What the Ricans valued more was the beast's longevity, hoping to study it for potential life extension breakthroughs. But now, with the emergence of the swarm also theorized by biologists to be ancient organisms, their focus had shifted. Initial research on the swarm indicated no genetic factors for extended lifespan. Even their raiders lived no more than 20 years. The swarm's survival from ancient times might have been due to simple hibernation. If mere hibernation were the explanation, then the Rican space hibernation pods could achieve similar results. Yet to a sapient species, sleeping for 300 years without truly living held little meaning. Furthermore, the swarm's hibernation methods seemed inefficient. Likely, only a handful of eggs had survived from ancient times and reawakened under specific conditions. Comparative data collected since the Ricans' arrival indicated that the planet's biomass had significantly decreased compared to earlier cat's ear reports. At this rate, the swarm could consume all surface life within a century. Perhaps the extinction of ancient species was tied to these bugs. Despite their relatively low individual strength, their insatiable consumption wreaked havoc on ecosystems. Without natural predators, they could rapidly destabilize the environment. This theory led scientists to suspect that swarm eggs might hold secrets. Yet no eggs had been discovered. Beyond the food stores, nest tunnels descended sharply underground. If the Rican pushed further, the swarm simply sealed the passages. The Ricans had no means to penetrate deeper for now. If this beast shared the swarm's characteristics and had survived solely through hibernation, its value was limited. Masai's thoughts were interrupted when a crew member displayed live satellite footage on his screen. The sea surface revealed a massive shadow writhing beneath, interspersed with flashes of blue light. The creature was moving swiftly toward the shore. Based on calculations, the beast will make landfall in 5 minutes, the crew member reported. Which special operations teams are nearby? Masai asked after a pause. General, TZ-131 and TZ-084 are in the vicinity and ready to deploy. If they move now, they'll intercept the beast as it reaches shore, another crew member replied after some quick checks. TZ-131 again, it made sense. They were the ones who had launched the nukes and were already on standby. TZ-084, likely a patrol unit, was also nearby. Together, they were the fastest response teams available. Masai quickly issued orders, good. Notify them to move to the coastline and block the beast's retreat. Additionally, mobilize all special operations teams within a 5,000 km radius. They must reach the battlefield within 30 minutes. The original Godzilla had been dead for decades. This was a replica constructed by Luo Wen, created using the original's template without any alterations. The enormous resources invested in creating this Godzilla were intended as a contingency plan if the Ricans proved unbeatable, the swarm could retreat without leaving any glaring inconsistencies. After all, if something so conspicuous vanished, suspicions would inevitably arise. Later, when the Reckons turned out to be less formidable than anticipated, Luo Wen had thought the creature was no longer necessary. But then it occurred to him that it could still serve a purpose. Half an hour later, the nearby special operations teams had assembled, but Godzilla didn't behave as the Reckons expected. Instead of landing, it lingered in the shallow waters, pacing. It seems wary of the gunboats. Of course it is. The Cat's Ear report mentioned this tactic being used against it before. Although it escaped, it must have retained some fear of them. Rubbish. I read the report too, and it didn't say anything about injuring the beast. If it wasn't hurt, why did it retreat into the sea? I'm telling you, if they hadn't used nukes back then, our predecessors might have worn it down before it returned to the ocean. Ha! When did you grow a brain? I thought it was all muscle up there. Ha ha! Ha ha! Enough! Mana, you looking for a fight? Bring it on! Who's afraid of who? Within the regional communications channel, the banter between multiple special operations captains continued. Orders received, all gunboats' main cannons are to charge for a synchronized volley. Ensure the target is neutralized in one strike. Chapter 267, The Pursuit. That's how it should be. Does it think that staying in the water will keep us from attacking it? Haha, it probably thinks our gunboat firepower is still stuck 50 years in the past. I highly doubt its intelligence is capable of contemplating anything that complex. Let's show this big dumb beast the power of technology. A few minutes later, all the gunboats aimed and charged their weapons. Dozens of thick energy beams shot toward Godzilla, surrounding it completely. These beams, far more powerful than those from decades ago, inflicted unimaginable damage in a single salvo. Godzilla's agonized wails echoed across the sky. A significant portion of its head was blown off, 3 large holes were torn through its neck, its right arm was left hanging by a thread of flesh, and multiple enormous wounds nearly a meter wide and deep gouged its torso and legs. On land, where Godzilla moved sluggishly, it was nothing more than a massive target. As long as their weapons could penetrate its defenses, killing it was only a matter of time. Fortunately for Godzilla, it appeared to have some resistance to this kind of energy, sparing it from instant death. But even if it survived, it likely wouldn't live for long. Perhaps due to part of its skull being blown open, Godzilla seemed to have seen the light physically. It reacted swiftly, refraining from unleashing its thermonuclear breath and instead turning and heading back toward the sea. Its movements were so fast that waves tens of meters high rose in its wake. Even the Reckon people were startled by Godzilla's defense and vitality. Seeing it attempt to escape, they quickly ordered another salvo. But before the gunboat's main cannons could finish charging, Godzilla had taken a few swift steps and dived into the ocean. Although the water was still shallow, leaving its entire back exposed above the surface, Godzilla's swimming speed far outstripped its movement on land. With a few agile strokes, Godzilla covered over a kilometer, gradually sinking deeper into the sea. The Reckon people's second volley only struck the shadow of Godzilla in the water. Though it still seemed to inflict significant damage, they ultimately failed to stop its retreat. It's done for. After it, half the gunboats plunged into the water in pursuit. These sleekly designed craft were amphibious and could move swiftly underwater. The other half of the fleet, boxy and brick-like, lacked aquatic capabilities. They remained airborne, providing visual support from above. Where's it headed? No idea. You don't know? An injured beast would naturally want to hide in its den. Kid, you rookies are getting cocky. How about a man-to-man duel? On the communication channel, the squad captains bantered without a trace of tension. The monster was already gravely injured and wouldn't last much longer. The Reckon people's weapons weren't as effective underwater, so they refrained from attacking. In Godzilla's current state, they merely needed to keep up the chase. Once it exhausted the last of its strength, it would be ripe for the taking. Understanding this, the captains were in a notably relaxed mood. Godzilla seemed desperate to shake off the pursuing gunboats, but its speed didn't provide much of an advantage. Worse yet, several tracking devices had been embedded in its body during the previous attack. Coupled with its injuries, escaping its pursuers was impossible. As time passed, Godzilla, now teetering on the brink of death, could no longer care about much else. While its wounds looked horrific, they were mostly reparable over time. The exception was the damage to its enlightened brain, which was truly fatal. If it had been able to rest and heal immediately, there might have been a chance of recovery. But under the current conditions, the constant flush of seawater worsened its injuries. Its condition deteriorated, and its speed gradually slowed. Thankfully, its destination was near. "It looks like it's done for," one captain exclaimed. "Haha, this is a big catch. Wonder how it tastes. Probably tough. Bet it'd get stuck in your teeth. Maybe a bite would give you a random radiation sickness. Damn it. You just ruined my appetite. Haha." The jovial atmosphere filled the Riken Special Forces. Godzilla managed to press on for another 20 kilometers, finally reaching its destination, its lair. The joy of returning home gave it a brief resurgence of strength, allowing it to speed up slightly before diving headlong into an underwater cave. Is that its lair? Seems like it. I hate caves, whether they're on land or underwater. Same. Be cautious. We're not certain it's a lone bachelor. The captains grew alarmed. That was indeed a critical issue. In the ocean, their forces were halved, and their weaponry's effectiveness was diminished. So what do we do? Wait for reinforcements. With you guys already here, I don't want to share the credit further. Let's proceed cautiously and maintain distance. Have you all gone soft fighting bugs? We can deploy probes, there's probably no magnetic interference here. That was a valid point. The captains, accustomed to the magnetic interference of insect lairs, had instinctively assumed this cave would be the same. Several underwater drones were released from the gunboats, cautiously venturing into the underwater cave. There really isn't any magnetic interference here. This is a major discovery. Those bugs might have some species that generate magnetic fields. It's normal for ancient creatures to have special traits. Even spitting nuclear bombs isn't unheard of. Fair enough. I've got no argument against that. But where did the monster go? You think this could be a maze, and it's already escaped? The captains were alarmed. That was a possibility. Haha, are you all fools? It's still got trackers on it. There's no magnetic interference here, and the trackers are working fine. He'll have to duel all of us later. Right. A duel against all of us. Stop messing around. Be careful. The tracker shows it hasn't gone far. The underwater drones pressed forward for a few more minutes and finally found Godzilla lying at the bottom of the cave. Its dorsal fins, faintly glowing with blue light, were strikingly conspicuous in the darkness. It's definitely done for. I think we can approach now. The drones, being expendable, swam straight to Godzilla, scanning its surroundings and relaying information back to the special forces. Be cautious. That's a live nuke. Watch out for a self-detonation, one captain warned. How do you know it'll self-destruct? Another captain asked skeptically. There didn't seem to be any such data in their files. That's how it always goes in the movies. Chapter 268, The Fruit. The events in the movie didn't occur. Godzilla was genuinely weakened to the extreme, and as the gunboats approached, it could only look on helplessly, utterly powerless to resist. Truly spectacular. These gunboats, typically about 30 meters in length, were small compared to the over 100-meter-long Godzilla. Though they weren't exactly tiny, they were barely big in comparison. Indeed. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd never have imagined such a creature could exist. Look at the blue glow on its dorsal fins, so beautiful. Hearing this, the captain was silently added to the not fit to be left alone list by his colleagues. General Masai was also watching the scene remotely through the cameras mounted on the gunboats. Though he shared a similar sense of awe, not being there in person made it hard to fully grasp the magnitude of the experience. Still, since this creature was already close to death, bringing it back for study might yield some surprising discoveries. The orders are in. The general wants us to take this behemoth back to Irwin Base, formerly Cross Base. How long until it finally kicks the bucket? Hard to say. This thing has already exceeded our understanding. Then how do we transport it? Can our gunboats even tow something this big? Shouldn't be an issue. We've got 21 gunboats here, enough to haul something weighing 30 to 40,000 tons. But it's still alive. How do we tie it down? Maybe we should ask for its opinion. Everyone was feigning ignorance. Wandering near Godzilla while it was alive was one thing, but actually trying to handle it was intimidating for all of them. 5 minutes later. We can't just wait around. If we delay any longer, we'll be violating orders. Let's go for another round of attacks. It might leave the body less intact, but at least it's safer. Since they were in the water, the energy beams from the gunboats suffered severe attenuation while passing through. As a result, the Reikan forces had to conduct a total of 3 more rounds of attacks before finally blasting apart Godzilla's head. This was only possible because Godzilla was so injured that it could barely dodge. In truth, Godzilla still had enough strength for a last-ditch counterattack, and could have easily taken several Reikan gunboats down with it. However, to prevent environmental damage to the surrounding area, it wasn't given another chance to fight back. Another dozen or so minutes passed. Once they confirmed that Godzilla was indeed dead, the gunboats released their ropes and hooks, fastening them to various parts of its body in preparation to tow it away. Unfortunately, gunboats weren't designed for heavy transport, and Godzilla was far heavier than the Reikans had anticipated. Furthermore, the earlier attacks had caused part of the cave to collapse, leaving the creature partially buried under rubble. Even with over 20 gunboats, they couldn't pull Godzilla out. Left with no choice, they reported the situation and awaited reinforcements. "Rookie, where do you think you're going? Don't wander off," a captain suddenly said over the communication channel. The so-called rookie was Kaida. Having been promoted by Lieutenant Colonel Cross to Special Operations Team Captain, he was nicknamed Rookie by the more experienced captains. "Treasure hunting. That's how it works in movies, right? Monster lairs usually hide some kind of treasure," Kaida replied. Everyone was speechless. Movies were nonsense. What reference value could they possibly have? Yet, this time, a movie-like plotline actually came true. About 10 minutes later, Kaida's voice came through the channel, "Hey, everyone, come look at this." "What is it? Don't tell me this guy actually found treasure." Curious, the other gunboats turned toward Kaida's location. "What's this? It looks like some kind of plant." Moving past Godzilla's body and further into the cave, the team discovered the so-called treasure, a red and black vine-like plant with numerous fruits emitting a faint purple glow. "Even though I'm not an expert, I can tell this is something unusual," Kaida remarked. "Yeah, I can see that too. No kidding. With the radiation levels here, we wouldn't last more than half an hour without protective suits. Yet, this plant is thriving. There's definitely something special about it. Those fruits look delicious. Go ahead and try one, then tell us how it tastes." "Screw you, I'm not that dumb. Why can't we eat them?" one team member quietly asked his captain. "Are you stupid? This thing grew in a radiation-heavy environment. Even a tiny trace of radiation could give you multiple radiation-related illnesses at best or kill you outright at worst," the captain snapped, glad that the others hadn't heard. If they found out there was someone this idiotic in their team, they'd be laughing about it for years. "Maybe we can take some back for the experts to analyze." "Agreed. We're just killing time anyway, and this might turn out to be another achievement." Using underwater robots equipped with radiation shielding containers, they carefully cut and collected several samples of the plant and its fruit. No sooner had the robots returned than reinforcements arrived. After detailed measurements, some smaller engineering ships blasted open the cave. Several transport ships, each over 100 meters long, landed on the water's surface. Half-meter-thick cables were lowered to the seabed, wrapped around Godzilla's body, and slowly hoisted it out of the ocean. The transport ships then began their journey back to the land-based facility. The swarm had gone to great lengths to bring certain elements into the Reikan's view. Considering the compatibility issues between the fungal carpet and the swarm's spacefaring organisms, Luo Wen had specially designed the new plants to be completely distinct from the fungal carpet. This rushed project was Luo Wen's most intense research effort in a long time. Fortunately, these plants didn't require the same complexity as the original fungal carpet. By tailoring them to the physiology of the Reikans and adding some unique features and genetic nodes for communication purposes, Luo Wen managed to make the plants appear entirely unrelated to the swarm. This step was critical because the swarm's earlier creations like the fungal carpet had already been exposed. For these plants, it was essential to eliminate any visible connections to the swarm while laying groundwork for future plans. What concerned Luo Wen most was the potential existence of advanced civilizations. He was always wary of coincidences, often using asymmetric information to create his own. But this also made him suspicious of seemingly random coincidences. In the dark forest, he believed, there was no such thing as causeless affection. Luo Wen needed more information to draw conclusions and had to uncover the true origins of that ancient spaceship. In the meantime, he had to make preparations, restructuring parts of the swarm as necessary. What had already been exposed couldn't be helped. What remained hidden had to stay that way, while some groundwork still needed to be laid. Chapter 269, Effectiveness. Most of the issues were manageable and within normal bounds. However, the biggest problem lay in the swarm's strongest asset, the swarm network. While the other functions of the swarm network were acceptable due to their high level of concealment, the cross-stellar communication feature, despite being equally covered, could potentially reveal flaws in certain scenarios. For instance, the swarm's external communication systems were extremely outdated. Fortunately, after absorbing a wave of technology from the Cat's Ear spaceship, the swarm managed to barely catch up technologically. However, the swarm's communication infrastructure was exceedingly sparse. Large-scale interstellar information transmitters, which occupied vast areas, were deliberately avoided during initial construction to reduce visible artificial structures in space and to deceive the common ratfolk populace. As a result, such facilities were never built. Over time, as they were deemed unnecessary, the matter was forgotten. However, the absence of these massive transmitters was a glaring characteristic. If an advanced civilization were secretly observing the swarm, they would surely notice that the swarm lacked these devices, yet their interstellar operations remained unaffected. This was a glaring vulnerability. Now, all Luo Wen could do was try to remedy past oversights and hope his concerns were merely unwarranted fears. Even if advanced civilizations were observing them, he hoped they would overlook these anomalies from the swarm. Yes, the swarm was still too weak. While they could manipulate civilizations of similar technological levels, they remained powerless against those of higher orders. The swarm was no longer just Luo Wen alone. With numerous dependents under its banner, he bore responsibility for the entire swarm. The swarm must grow stronger. But becoming stronger wasn't just about words. Whether through mechanical pathways or biological routes, a comprehensive theoretical foundation was essential. Thus, the swarm needed more researchers. Fortunately, the swarm was establishing a second intelligent entity production base, which promised a significant boost in production speed soon. Dr. Balt, how is that big creature coming along? General Masai asked during a routine captain's meeting. These past days had been peaceful, and the source of their initial arrival here had already been located. Numerous new bases and factories had sprung up, both consolidating occupied territories and replenishing losses. The next step was to methodically eliminate the swarm threat. Although the biological team led by Dr. Balt had temporarily shelved their research on swarm eradication viruses due to the creature, the Recon felt they had already mastered methods to counter the swarm. Recent operations had proven highly successful, with the military convinced that viruses weren't necessary and that exterminating the swarm was only a matter of time. Under such circumstances, routine captains' meetings lacked substantive discussions. However, it wouldn't do to convene just for greetings and adjournment. After all, these were serious, formal meetings. Thus, General Masai shifted the topic to prolong the discussion. Fortunately, the nuclear-breathing creature was a rare phenomenon. Everyone was curious, and their inquisitive eyes bore into Dr. Balt through the video screens. Although this was a captain's meeting, experts from other fields often participated as consultants. Dr. Balt, used to such situations, cleared his throat and spoke without suspense-building theatrics. Research time has been too short, so no significant breakthroughs yet. Truthfully, there was nothing worth hyping. Godzilla emitted intense radiation, and without protective measures, the Recon couldn't even approach its corpse. Thus, a specialized, highly shielded laboratory was constructed for Godzilla. Transporting and calibrating scientific equipment from the warship to the planet consumed considerable time, leaving Dr. Balt's team with little to show in such a short period. The captains understood this, so they didn't press further. After all, General Masai's inquiry was a mere meeting filler. However, we've made some astonishing discoveries in other areas, Dr. Balt continued, piquing everyone's interest. Amid the captain's inquiries, he elaborated, the creature itself yielded no results, but the plants brought back from its lair surprised us. Drinking some water, he resumed, specifically, the fruit of those plants. Since some instruments hadn't arrived yet, a small team began studying the fruit during their downtime, feeding it to Ryrie beasts. The Recon fleet maintained dedicated logistics and transportation ships, two of which simulated Recon ecosystems to house experimental creatures like Ryrie beasts. These animals shared a 95% genetic similarity with the Recon, making them ideal for drug trials. A few days later, the Ryrie beasts exhibited various radiation sickness symptoms. The captains raised mental question marks. Was this the so-called astonishing discovery? It seemed trivial plants growing in the high radiation layer would naturally carry radioactive substances. Developing radiation sickness was expected, and severe cases might even result in instant death. However, trusting that Dr. Balt wouldn't speak frivolously, they curbed their skepticism and listened further. When the instruments finally arrived, the team didn't study the creature but continued researching the fruit and the Ryrie beasts. They uncovered something shocking: although the Ryrie beasts contracted radiation sickness, their bodies grew younger. To be precise, their cell division count increased. Seeing some captains puzzled, Dr. Balt explained, all known organisms, including the Riken, follow a pattern of cell division throughout growth. After a certain stage, aging and death occur. This corresponds to the cell division count and cycle. Their product determines an organism's theoretical lifespan. For instance, Riken cells divide approximately every 6 years, with a maximum of 55 divisions, giving a theoretical lifespan of 330 years. As the captains nodded, he continued, similarly, Ryrie beasts have a 2-year division cycle and divide 25 times, theoretically living 50 years. Of course, external factors mean actual lifespans often fall short. For example, the Riken average is around 310 years. To extend lifespan, you either prolong the cell division cycle or increase division count. The former risks fundamentally altering our biology, potentially making us a different species. Increasing the division count is comparatively feasible but remains a challenge. Despite millennia of research, we've made no breakthroughs. Yet, now things have changed. Eating this fruit increased the Ryrie beast's cell division count by 5, extending their theoretical lifespan by 1/5. Dr. Balt gestured at the screen displaying the fruit from the creature's lair. This is the first substance we've found capable of increasing cell division counts. In other words, it's medicinal. And if refined, its effects might become even stronger. After a pause, he added, though it does have some minor flaws. Chapter 270, The Story. The attendees' eyes lit up. Dr. Balt's explanation was straightforward, and everyone understood the implications. Who wouldn't want to live a few years longer? Especially for those in high positions of power, longevity was an irresistible temptation. While the fruit's actual problems went far beyond the minor flaws Dr. Balt casually mentioned, the allure of extended life would undoubtedly mobilize the entire civilization. With enough resources and effort, these minor flaws might indeed become trivial. Doctor, is there anything your research team still needs? Let us know, and we'll make it happen as best we can, General Masai said bluntly. He knew that dealing with scientists required a direct approach. The subtext was clear: we're deeply interested in this project. Request whatever resources you need to produce results as quickly as possible. Once you succeed, everything else can be negotiated. For those stationed in the T85 star system, this fruit represented an unprecedented opportunity. If they could independently develop something so valuable and unique, their influence within their civilization would grow immensely. However, their fleet was a combat and frontier expansion force. Its cargo was primarily weapons, space factories, and fortress components. The personnel were mostly soldiers, leaving limited room for researchers and precision instruments. Moreover, the fleet had been assembled and constructed entirely in space. The delicate equipment essential for such research was manufactured on the Riken homeworld and wasn't designed to endure the turbulence of atmospheric transport. Dr. Balt, no superhuman, shook his head and said, "We lack specialized instruments and enough researchers in this field. With our current resources, it would be nearly impossible to achieve meaningful results quickly." This posed a significant problem for General Masai. Given time, progress might be made. While General Masai, still middle-aged, could afford to wait, older officers like Major General Porter likely couldn't. They might not live to see the research bear fruit. Now that they knew of the possibility of extending their lifespans, speed was paramount. To delay could lead to unrest. After all, Masai's authority was not absolute. He was merely the most powerful leader in a loose coalition. If push came to shove, every member of this coalition had their own forces at their disposal. If they sought help from the home world, the fleet would be reduced to mere suppliers of raw materials. Selling raw materials versus finished products were vastly different propositions. While Masai was still deliberating, Dr. Balt spoke again. "General, I believe it's too early to focus on potential results. Our immediate priority should be to confirm this plant's growth environment and yield. If its numbers are substantial, we might be able to speed up research by rapidly accumulating experimental data. Masai realized the truth in Balt's words. If the plant turned out to be rare, they wouldn't even be able to supply raw materials. The meeting concluded with consensus, and multiple teams were dispatched to further explore Godzilla's lair. If the Recon had meticulously searched the lair immediately after Godzilla's death, they might not have found many life-extending plants. At that time, the plants had only recently been created and hadn't grown much, even with accelerated cultivation. Without an insider's guidance, discovery was uncertain. But after several days, imperfections in the setup had been smoothed out. When the Recon teams returned, they found an abundant supply of the plants with little effort. When General Masai received this news, his concerns eased, and he ordered the special forces to collect as many samples as possible. Unbeknownst to the Recon, the plants had been deliberately enhanced by the swarm. Hidden within their roots were spores of the fungal carpet, ready to be transported aboard Recon ships. This roundabout method seemed needlessly convoluted, but Luo Wen had no better alternative. It was the most suitable plan he could devise. The simplest solution would have been for Kaida to directly bring the spores back. With Lieutenant Colonel Cross covering for him, the risk of detection would have been almost non-existent. If this were solely a two-sided contest between the swarm and the Recon, such a method would have been the most efficient and secure. But if a third-party observer existed, precautions had to be taken. In a two-sided scenario, the swarm could afford to act more overtly. But if external entities were involved, the swarm, potentially a mere pawn, had to keep its capabilities as concealed as possible. Even losing Kaida or Cross wouldn't have been a major setback for the swarm. The real question was why they were transporting fungal spores to a Recon ship. While the Recon wouldn't uncover anything, a hypothetical observer might. Exposing any aspect of the swarm's abilities for such a trivial matter would be a grave mistake. Hence, the swarm needed to craft a plausible narrative to support its actions. For instance, the story of Kaida leading the Recon to discover the life-extending plants was carefully constructed. From Cross's capture and subsequent rescue to her promotion of the patrol captain who risked his life to protect her, every step was deliberate. The chain of events continued, with the swarm resuming hunting operations. Cross retaliated by assigning the special forces to drop a nuclear bomb. The blast attracted Godzilla, leading to its pursuit, lair exploration, and eventual discovery of the treasure. This sequence of events was supported by orders from higher UPS, mission logs, and gunboat travel records, all of which could be corroborated. Even if someone were to investigate further, Cross's rise to captain, her involvement in this mission, and even her personal background, family, education, career all followed a reasonable trajectory. This was the hallmark of a successful story. Luo Wen understood that if the fungal carpet were to appear on a Recon planet, its origins would be scrutinized. Observers would need to determine how it arrived, making direct transportation by an insider implausible. But a well-constructed narrative? That could carry the day.